Hi guys, so in this video what I'm going to talk about is codependence. And if you are interested in this content, feel free to like and subscribe. If you are interested in private coaching, go to www.coachcat.org. So how can you tell if you're a codependent? Well, here are some of the signs of codependency. Is you find yourself looking for outside validation. You're looking externally for other people to validate you rather than self-validating. You might have a difficult time making decisions for yourself. You will make decisions based on the other people in your life. You could be a people pleaser. You might not trust yourself or your own intuition. You feel doubtful about what you're feeling inside. Codependents tend to also be very empathetic. They tend to be strong. They tend to be the doers. They tend to do more than their fair share in relationships, and they can definitely struggle with self-care. They can have a difficult time actually figuring out for themselves what makes them happy. They tend to be pathological givers. They tend to give for the wrong reasons, or sometimes give for the wrong reasons. And if you're finding yourself giving and giving and giving, and then you're getting resentful, or you're feeling like like reciprocity is not occurring, or you're giving with an expectation that the person's going to reciprocate in a very specific way, these are all signs that you might struggle with codependence. Are you filled up with giving, internally, and you're coming from this place of wellness and wholeness, so you give what you have to give? Or are you giving and giving and giving when you have not done proper self-care? Codependents typically have a difficult time saying no. And again, they need outside validation. They have a hard time figuring out, what their own feelings are, what they want, what their needs are, how they're actually feeling. And what can happen, well, one thing to note is, where did they come from? How do people get to be codependent? Well, it's really a trauma response. We've talked about this in other videos. There's the stimuli, there's the trauma, and then the codependent will either have the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response. They typically came from families where there was their feelings were not validated. Now, that may have been because there was poverty and neglect, and there wasn't enough resources to care for the children. It could be from a family that's very cold and narcissistic, so they just were not good at validating the child's feelings or caring about the internal life of the child, the emotional life. So, you see when they get to be adults, what they often do is they're seeking outside validation. And, again, most codependents did not get that kind of validation growing up. So once they get into the adult world, they're looking for the external validation to sort of fill them up or make them feel like they're okay. And if you need external validation in order to feel okay, then that is part of the problem. And you have to ask yourself, am I capable of self-validating? Am I able to say to myself, hey, I did a really good job. I'm really proud of you, Kat. Or, hey, good job at work today. I'm proud of you for overcoming what you've overcome, and you're doing great. And, I love you. Do you have a hard time doing that with yourself? If so, then you might be codependent. Codependents tend to be really good at giving other people validation, giving lots of love. They're givers, right? But then when it comes to themselves, they tend to be very perfectionistic and critical, and they tend to berate themselves internally for being less than perfect, right? So, they overextend themselves without even figuring. They're the fixers, right? So if somebody has a problem, they're gonna immediately be in there to fix it and to help that person. And often they don't even wait for that person to ask and say, hey, I need some help. Can you help me with this? They're really notorious for jumping in and fixing situations, and sort of even in some sense playing God, because it's they think they know what's best for others, right? So it's really this real issue of not doing a lot of self-care, self-validation, self-focus. They're very externally focused. And they tend to take other people's problems on as their own. And they actually feel internally like it's their job to fix other people's problems. Typically, part of the way codependents operate is like they're not happy unless everyone around them is happy. Like they need everyone around them to be okay in order for them to feel okay, right? They tend to be great at offering unsolicited advice. They're doers. They overfunction in relationships. They tend to find themselves or co-create one-sided relationships. They tend to do a lot of people pleasing. They definitely have a hard time setting boundaries. And that often stems from the fact that their boundaries, when they were children, their boundaries were quite often egregiously violated. They may have suffered from physical abuse, verbal abuse, sexual abuse, psychological or emotional abuse. So, this comes from a place, this development of codependency does come from this place typically of, some sort of abuse or trauma. And what they often do is they will over-identify with others. They with others' pain and others' problems. They tend to be like these very, very empathetic people. And what are some things that you can do if you are finding yourself having a lot of these characteristics of codependence? Well, probably the number one thing you can do is establish some healthy boundaries for yourself and figure out like what are your boundaries. And I mean, this has been a real challenge for me in my life, is just even figuring out what my boundaries are and what's okay with me and what isn't. And a lot of that comes from my perspective, because there was a lot of abuse in my home. So I don't even know what normal healthy boundaries are, right? So I've had to learn like, oh, it's not normal, these types of abuse, like that's actually not normal. That's not healthy. So figure out like what your boundaries are. And I've gone over this a few times, but there's like a 5-step boundary setting system where you can, your job is to, identify what your boundary is, clearly communicate your boundary to the other person, ask for feedback from the other person, ask the other person to let you know what they heard your boundary was, so you make sure that they're picking up what you're slapping down, right? And then another thing is to hold your boundary. And then the last portion of it is, if the boundary is violated, what is the consequence? And are you willing and able, and do you follow through with the consequence? And in the earlier stages, when you're setting the boundary, you should also be very clear that you communicate what the potential consequence is going to be. So setting boundaries is key. I've made a couple of videos on like really clear videos on that 5-step process and some ways that you can practice setting boundaries. So the cure for codependence is healthy boundaries. And again, if you came from trauma, if you came from abuse, if you came from neglect, if you came from a narcissistic relationship, if you were abused psychologically, emotionally, physically, spiritually, then you might have a really hard time even knowing what healthy boundaries are, right? So, or if you came from a meshed family or neglectful. So that's something you need to get really clear on. Like, what are my boundaries? What are my limits? What behavior will I tolerate? What I won't, right? And everyone's boundaries are different. And then another part of the cure for codependence is learning how to self-validate, how to give yourself the love and the validation that you're seeking from the outside world. And I know that this is a journey. I am still on this journey. I certainly do not have this stuff mastered. I'm like learning it myself as I'm helping you guys as best I can. I'm learning. And I've realized recently, it's been brought to my attention by my mentor that when I'm doing certain things, it's like I'm trying to sell myself to someone. I'm trying to get some outside validation. I'm trying to ask somebody else to show me that I'm okay, rather than just acknowledging that, I'm actually okay. Like I'm a wonderful person in many ways, but my internal dialogue is telling me some other stuff. And so I'm seeking that outside validation, and I'm really trying to, my goal for the next few weeks is to really focus on, learning how to sort of self-regulate, self-validate, and not like need that external validation so much. And then another piece of curing your codependence is to learn some healthy self-love, to really start healing that part of you that says that you're not worthy, that you're not good enough, or that you're not, you're not valuable. That is a huge piece, because I think once you start self-validating, once you start loving yourself, truly loving yourself, then it's not going to affect you so much if other people don't like you. In fact, another really wise person said to me once that if you send your true, authentic self to relationships and somebody doesn't like you, okay, that means that, you're sending your true self. If you're saying, hey, this is me, this is who I am, this is what I believe in, this is my boundary. And if they're like, they don't like it, or they try to push against your boundary and they don't respect it, well, that's a sign that like you're being your true self. Not everybody is going to like you in this world, and that is quite all right, right? So also learning to say no to others, and to not get in there and fix their stuff for them without them asking. Like it's not your job to go around like saving the world. And I know, again, like I'm a hypocrite because I'm saying this, but I know that these are all the things that I struggle with myself, like learning how to love myself, learning how to do self-care. I tend to do this thing where I want to save the world, and I want to help everyone else, but like I forget that I need to do self-care before I can extend myself to others. And then, if you say no and you set boundaries, like most people are actually going to respect you. And the ones that don't, if they don't respect your boundary, or if they like try to push your boundary past where you set it, they're probably sort of a toxic person, and you probably don't want them in your world anyway. So like if you set a boundary and somebody doesn't respect it, like that's a huge red flag. So most people will respect your boundaries once you start setting them and holding them. And then learning another part is that you are lovable just as you are. Like you don't have to earn love. You don't have to be perfect in order for somebody to love you. You don't have to, meet this certain person's like unrealistic perfectionistic criteria. You are lovable just as you are, just for being you. It's not about, you don't have to earn love. It doesn't work that way. And then, really looking at that piece, starting to be aware where you find yourself being overly dependent for outside validation or for positive reinforcement, where you're needing somebody to tell you that you're okay in order for you to feel okay. And, I think a lot of this journey is learning how to give yourself the care, the validation, the love that you seek from the outside. And again, you did this because as a little kid, as a little tiny girl or a little tiny boy, you did not get those needs met. You did not have your feelings validated. You learned that you don't matter, or your feelings don't matter, that you're not good enough, or that you're just like less than, right? That's the message that you learn. I'm not saying your parents meant to send that, but for whatever reason, whatever the dynamics that were going on in that family, like that may be the message that you internalized. And so again, it's all about learning how like to provide some self-love and self-validation, and starting to trust your intuition, your instincts, starting to trust yourself. And then, check with yourself. Check with yourself. Ask yourself these questions. What do I think? How do I feel? How am I really feeling? What do I think? Not what do they want, not what do they think, but how do I think? How do I feel? And what is my intuition telling me about this person? Is my intuition telling me that something's off? Is my intuition telling me that something's not quite right? Well, if it's doing that, then I really encourage you to start learning how to trust that. Trust yourself. Start listening to that little voice in you that's telling you something isn't quite right. And then another part of curing this is, knowing that you cannot control others, but you can control you. You do not need to to have other people agree with your decisions. You need to make your own decisions, and, other people do not have to agree with you. They do not have to validate you. They do not have to tell you that, oh, your decision's okay. Like, it's actually up to you to make the decisions that work for you in your life. And then learn how to validate your own opinions, your own thoughts, your own feelings, rather than looking for this outside person to do that for you. And, be aware when you are seeking validation outside of yourself. Start to be aware of it. And it's something I'm really working on lately, actually, with my codependent sponsor and some of my mentor, is like, where am I seeking outside validation? Where am I needing somebody else to tell me I'm okay in order for me to buy into the idea that I'm okay? And, again, I went over this a little bit, but where did it come from? Well, it came from that childhood trauma. It came from, coming from neglect or abuse or trauma where you didn't get any of your feelings validated. So you don't even feel like your feelings matter. You feel like you're just, your feelings don't really matter. Other people's feelings, thoughts, needs, and desires come above yours. And, we tend to put other people above ourselves, and we tend to try to meet others' expectations rather than looking internally and trying to meet our expectations. And so codependents tend to have this extreme outward focus. And again, they're usually empaths, right? But I think of it like codependence is almost like you're an unhealed empath. You have this like extreme empathy for others and then not enough empathy for yourself. And you may tend to try to save people. You help people at your own detriment. You put others first. And this is sort of interesting in that, like, with the narcissist, a narcissist takes from others in order to feel good inside, and like a codependent gives to others in order to feel good inside. They both are seeking some sort of external source to make them feel okay. And both of them, both narcissists and codependents are very shame-based. They have low confidence, low self-esteem. Narcissist is much better at pretending that they have high self-esteem. They send that mask, but internally they're riddled with very low self-worth. Same with a codependent. Codependent's just more honest and open about that. Codependents tend to feel very responsible for other people's happiness. And, again, because when they were children, their feelings and their needs were shamed. So they tend to have even the shame around even having needs or having wants. And they feel like, there's a couple of different types of codependence, but some are like, I don't need anyone. I'm completely self-sufficient. They're always the doers. They're fixing everyone else, and they never ask for any help. And then there's the type that are like overly dependent. And you can also have that type where it's overly dependent in specific relationships. But again, it was because there was emotional, physical, psychological, verbal, abuse or neglect, usually sexual. It could run the gamut. And the codependent will tend to internalize this neglect. And what the record player in the codependent's head is like, I'm not worthy, I'm not enough, and I'm not good enough, and nothing I ever do is going to be good enough. And so quite often too, the child in one of these families was expected to live up to some sort of perfectionistic ideal or standard that was like almost impossible to live up to, or to disavow any needs and to deal with like neglect and to like take care of themselves as a young child. Sometimes you'll find in these families, the codependent was forced to be an adult at a very young age. Like they were a little kid and they were put in the position of being either, the nurturer to the parent or the parent to the parent. You can see this a lot if there's a child that grows up with an addicted parent where they're taking care of their parents when their parent has a binge or is drunk or can't drive or is throwing up or whatever they're doing. So a lot of times the child will become codependent because they're used to being the adult in that relationship, and they have to grow up way too fast. And again, this has that result of like feeling like they're never good enough, like nothing they do is ever going to be, they're not worthy. They have to earn love. They have to be doers. If they're not doing, then they're not lovable. And of course, as you can imagine, this creates a very toxic dance if they get with a narcissist, because a narcissist is like, you are going to earn my love by doing a bunch of shit for me, right? And they're these pathological takers, right? And they dole out approval based on performance, because that's what they learn in their dysfunction, right? And so that's a really bad combination with a codependent, because a codependent's like, love me, love me, love me. Look how much I'm going to do for you. I'll do anything to make you happy. I'll put your needs above my own. I'll have no wants or needs. You're the queen, you're the king, and they'll sacrifice themselves at the altar of sort of the narcissistic ego. And then the narcissist is like the taker, like, let me take. Let me see what I can extract from you. You need to earn love. You need to work your butt off and earn and show me that, you're valuable. And again, I'm sorry, but you are valuable just for being you, and you deserve to be loved even though you're not perfect, and you deserve to be loved even though you may not, rule the world. It's okay. Like, you don't have to be perfect in order to be loved. You do not have to meet up to somebody else's expectations in order to be loved. What you need to do in order to be loved is to start loving you, and to start validating yourself, and to start really appreciating the person that you are, and seeing that at the core, you're like a beautiful soul. And in terms of your empathy, I mean, I love codependents because, quite frankly, the ones that I know are some of the most empathetic people I've ever met. And quite frankly, my belief is that this world needs empathy. This world needs healers. This world needs people that are kind and want, other people to be happy. You just have got to learn how to put your oxygen mask on yourself while the plane's going down, rather than putting it on other people first. You've got to learn how to generate your own self-validation. And so I hope this is helpful for you guys. This is just something that came up recently in one of my coaching calls, and I just really thought it was worth sharing on. So I hope you guys are thriving. And again, if you want private coaching, go to www.coachcat.org. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.